This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Hello, my name is Emma Fay and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Guildhouse. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the final Perspectives presentation for 2021. Perspectives is an initiative developed by the Bob Hawke Ministerial Centre, ASOPN and Guildhouse. It's a series of thought-provoking lectures and talks that invites leading artists, makers and cultural thinkers to South Australia to engage with compelling ideas currently shaping our world. In this presentation, we will hear from Hannah Presley as she presents her talk titled Curator, Confidant. Hannah Presley is an Aboriginal curator based in Melbourne. She is a director of agency and was most recently the curator of Indigenous art, National Gallery of Victoria. Hannah's career spans many organisations, large and small, and today she shares some really wonderful insights about the way that she works with community and how she works across the sector, and in that way, how she's affected great change. I am speaking to you today on Kaurna land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This edition of the Perspectives talk is very excitingly featured in the Tarnanthi Festival. The Tarnanthi Festival is a nationwide event that brings together artists from art centres all over the country, as well as showcasing incredible exhibitions across South Australia. Hannah's talk will actually be followed by an in-conversation with Guildhouse Artistic Programs Manager Debbie Pryor and the Artistic Director of the Tarnanthi Festival, Nikki Cumpston. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce Nikki Cumpston to provide a welcome and introduction to this talk. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for having me, and it's lovely to have you here, Hannah, giving us a wonderful talk, which I know has been in the making for a while. So I'm the Artistic Director of Tarnanthi, a Festival of Contemporary Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art, and I live and work on Kaurna country, and I'd like to also pay my respect to the elders, to the past elders, who many of whom I've known and worked with over the 30 odd years that I've lived and worked here on Kaurna land. My family are Barkindji people. We come from the Barker, Darling River in Western New South Wales. And I work as a curator here at the Art Gallery of South Australia, as well as an artist, a writer, and I also work in education. So I really, I really value the opportunities that I have working in the arts and being able to share stories of my own and of other artists and people within the arts, curators and writers. And I really am honoured to be here today to welcome you, Hannah, to talk to all of us and to give us your insights and to be part of the Tarnanthi Festival. And I look forward to seeing you here one day very soon.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's so lovely to be here, and all of these warm welcomes. It's very special. Thank you. I too would like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands where I live and work, land that always was and always will be the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. So I would like to give you a little intro about who I am, and then I thought it might be good. I've been kind of looking back at some of the kind of projects that I think I can look back at now and see how much impact they've had on how I curate and what I guess I think a curator is, if that makes from these experiences. So to introduce myself, my grandfather is from the Moyle River region up near Pepperminardi in the Northern Territory. He was taken from his family at about age 8, we think, to the bungalows in Alice Springs. And so my dad was born in Alice Springs, and I have a big family there. So I was born in Melbourne, here on Wurundjeri country. So between the three of us, my grandpa, my dad, and myself, we kind of crossed the country, if that makes sense. So I've got connections sort of heading all the way back north, but have been living and working here in Melbourne for maybe the last 10 years. So when I'm just going to jump in. So when I finished school in Victoria, I moved up to Alice Springs to be with family, to spend time with my dad, who was still up there. And the first job that I really got up there wasn't in the arts, but was at the Alice Springs Women's Shelter. And I think about it now, and I was so young, but it was amazing work. Essentially, I was working with women and children in crisis from like around the Central Desert region, around Central India. Lots of amazing Aboriginal women and their families, as well as other women that were in the area. But that time, though it was really intense, those few years that I spent in that environment really gave me a sense of, I think, advocacy. And it made me really think about how important relationships are, and trust, and I guess, being kind of open to whatever stories were being shared with me. And at that stage in my life, I guess those stories were really full on stories of family violence, but also of family and connection and culture, and why those relationships in these extraordinary women's lives were so important. I sadly only lasted a few years in that environment. Like I said, I was so young, and I'm so grateful for that time. But I was looking for a way to, I guess, get into the arts. I felt like the way that I can help my community and communities across the country is through art. It was always something I was drawn to. And so I think after a trip back home to mum in Victoria, I arrived back in Alice Springs, and I walked into my absolute favorite gallery in Alice Springs, and just cocky little me asked for a job with no experience. I think about it now and I just think, oh my God, I was so bold. But I'm so glad that I did it, because it turned out that Cherie Mail, who was the manager there, was actually looking for somebody to help out. So I literally started the next day, and no experience, just all of a sudden I was in this art gallery. It was called Jupi Arts, and it was the like gallery and shopfront kind of component of the art centre at Papunya community. So you guys would know about Papunya through the extraordinary art movement. And some of those artists, like Long Jack Philippus Jackamara, who was there at that in those early days in the 70s, he was still painting, and I was like selling his work, and to tourists from all over the world. And so at Papunya community, they've now got an extraordinary art centre there called Jupi Arts. Definitely check out what they do. There's generations of artists there that are still, creating extraordinary work. But at the time Warumpi existed, we were selling canvases. And I guess I was in this space with 4 Aboriginal women, 4 women from different kind of backgrounds, and we were all there working out how to present this art, like represent the community, and I guess give context about culture. And that was kind of my my first job in the arts, was grappling all these, like this extraordinary art movement and the generations that had come from that, and to people that weren't even necessarily from this country, to so many tourists in Alice Springs. So I think the combination of coming from the women's shelter and understanding how important relationships were, to then being in this space with these 4 young women. I think we were all under 25 or something. I don't know I can't imagine that happening now, but it was the early 2000s, and it was Alice Springs was the place to be if you were interested in Indigenous art. Obviously, still now it's such an important space, but I was so lucky to, I guess, be in like a kind of young, vibrant space. We had older senior artists there, but we didn't have some, older white man there telling us how to talk about this art. We were getting it directly from the artists. They were coming in, bringing their artwork in and telling us what it was about, why it was important, how it fit into their community, their culture, their language, all of those things. So sadly, that was only by the time I started at Warumpi, I think it was about a year or so. And then sadly, Warumpi closed. But as I said, Jupi exists. So the community's doing really well now. This is a long time ago. But from there, I started working at, actually, can I just mention while we're here, this work behind me. This is my treasure. This is by an artist who has sadly passed away now, but Emma Nungarai. Daniels. This work is from that time. It's the first work I ever bought, and it's about from Jupi Arts, and it's a Yolka dreaming, or story about Yolka, which is the bush onion, and it's a women's story, and it's just my prize piece of every little work that I own. This is the one. So because it takes me back to those days. I've worked in so many different arts organizations, but I think the heart and soul that was in that space is what has really propelled me through all of these other experiences. Yeah, so I got to work at Araluen Galleries for a little while after that, and worked with lots of Central Australian art centres, worked on Desert Mob, presented that for a few years. And then after a while, I thought, I should probably go and do some study, which whenever I speak to students, university students, they're just like, what? You did all of this? But I think Alice Springs is one of those places that, if you're there at the right time and you're willing to work and learn, opportunities like that exist. So I was really lucky to have that. So came back to Victoria, and the first role that I had back in Victoria was curating the Victorian Indigenous Art Awards, which ran for a number of years and was a really important exhibition for Victorian Indigenous artists, because there weren't, I guess, even when I arrived about 10 years ago back in Melbourne, there weren't that many spaces that I guess acknowledged the work that was happening from our Aboriginal artists in the area. There was still the Koori Heritage Trust, thank God they have existed. Spaces like Black Dot Gallery, there were definitely spaces, but a lot of our mainstream spaces weren't acknowledging these artists so much. So the Indigenous Art Awards really existed to see what was out there. It was, as a curator, it was an extraordinary opportunity to travel around Victoria and meet artists in their home, in their communities, and then encourage them to put work in the exhibition. So in 2012, I curated that, and that's when I got to work with Elizabeth Little, or Liz Little, who has just been an amazing kind of guide and mentor. It was around that time that I was working with, Vicky Cousins and Marie Clark, and that Art Awards was the first time that Glenda Nichols presented a woven net. It was her first net that she had ever done. And she said to me, oh God, we can't put this in the gallery, I'll have to do another. And through conversations, that work made it into the show. It not only made it into the show, it won 2 prizes. And that actual net is now in the exhibition by Stacey Piper out at Tarawara Museum of Art for the Yellingwa project. So I'm super excited to have seen the life of that show, that work continue, and for Glenda's career to just keep moving. Most recently, I worked with Glenda on a commission in my role at NGV as curator of Indigenous art. And just to be able to revisit her practice with her so many years later, and to have that relationship over time with her since then and see that progress, it really speaks, I guess, to the way that I think about curating, about relationships over time, about understanding the context that that work is being made in, and not necessarily just what it looks like when it arrives at the gallery to be hung, so to speak. Yeah, it all comes down to relationships, I think. And speaking of the Art Awards and working with Liz Little, I'm now so lucky to be a director of agency, and Liz is on the board with me for that organisation as well. Time to have these ongoing relationships with curators, with artists, and lots of different makers across the country. But yeah, agency is super exciting for me at the moment because I've worked in lots of non-Indigenous spaces, lots of different kinds of arts organisations. And it feels like one of the first times in a really long time that I've worked for an Aboriginal organisation with projects that are, led by Aboriginal people. And there's just this different way of doing things that just feels a lot more logical. We're working with artists in a way that is bringing out the best in them, I guess, and it's because it's being led by them. So anyway, I could talk about agency for ages, but yeah, I guess I'm just talking about that to demonstrate all the different relationships that continue over time for me, and how lucky I've been to have these extraordinary mentors and people in my life. So of non-Indigenous spaces, I have worked in a lot of organisations that I guess are working out how to reach out and engage with First Nations artists and makers. And I think I go into these spaces when they get funding to have a First Nations curator or project worker to do that. I think that these roles are really important because First Nations artists, I think, especially where we are in Melbourne here, they haven't always been invited into these really kind of high-end flash art, and craft spaces. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes and we do some great projects, and then when I leave, it kind of wanes again. And sometimes it's successful, and we get artists in there at a level where they continue that relationship. It's just interesting to see which ones, which people and which artists and which combinations work, because we're all different. We're all coming from different backgrounds as Aboriginal people, as artists. And yeah, getting that mix right is just like, I guess, something that I think about a lot. But anyway, so I worked at Craft Victoria for, I think it was a year or two in the end. And that was a really interesting space for me because it had some kind of relationships over time with some of the more senior Indigenous artists, but there was nothing that you saw when you walked into that gorgeous space on, what's that bloody street? Flash end of Melbourne, where that gallery and retail space exists. When I first got there, I couldn't see any of me. I couldn't see any of the artists that I'd work with in that space. And through working, with the staff and particularly with the curator, Debbie, that's where I first met Debbie Pryor. I really started to understand, especially through working with Debbie, how the way that I curate, others work like that as well, because there's a generosity, respect, like an admiration for the artists that we work with, for what they do and how they do it. There's like a genuine like care that I found working with Debbie I could relate to. And so from that relationship, we actually collaborated on an amazing exhibition called Hero Worship. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the year, but it's been a little while. But that was a really wonderful experience, because whenever I work with other curators, whether they're First Nations or not, I'm amazed at how many connections are made, no matter what the background is. And it always comes together with that excitement for the artwork and the excitement for how can we get that artist's ideas, like those ideas across. Yeah, so yeah, I think Debbie really helped me work out how I felt about art and craft, which is still something that I continue to work on. But I think with Indigenous artists, there's kind of no, this is art, this is craft. You know, all of those things don't really exist. And I think working at Craft Victoria and with people that were specializing in craft and making and that contemporary craft, I feel like I found a place. I understood where the certain Indigenous artists that I was drawn to and their making fit into contemporary craft and contemporary art. And I guess that was an important moment, because after that I worked on lots of different things, but the next big show for me was at ACCA. And I walked into that space not knowing, they had some early major exhibitions when Max Delaney started there, like Sovereignty with Palabella. And I walked into that space not really knowing how, I guess, in that time, 2018, not that long ago, how Indigenous art fit into these spaces, where it fit, how it fit. And I think working with Max, I really got the understanding that Indigenous art is just a huge part of the contemporary art scene. It's not separate or different. It's like leading the way in like so many different areas. And I was able to maybe articulate that more and understand where that fit in. And so working at ACCA allowed me to create A Lightness of Spirit is the Measure of Happiness. And that show for me really brought together all the things that I'd been thinking about in these little jobs here and there that I had tried to carry through, I guess, from Warumpi Arts. And really, I think that show was important to me and to the artists and to a lot of the people that saw it, because it kind of, it was a reprieve almost. A lot of our First Nations artists are making work that speaks to these heavy histories that we all hold. And I'm really grateful that they do. I'm grateful that they do speak about these histories, about how we all fit into these, you know, histories of slavery and abuse and, you know, stealing children and all of these horrors. But I guess I wanted to create a show that kind of talked about how funny blackfellas are. Because, you know, humor is resilience, humor is survival. And, you know, I think Aboriginal people, humor has got us a long way. And I think with that show, I was able to flip some of these things and still talk about, you know, like those histories are still there. They're not going anywhere. But the artists that I chose to bring together for that show were reflecting, as the first instance, something light. And then the audience had the choice to go into those works and find all that heavy stuff, where that comes from. But the first interaction wasn't re-traumatizing. And I say that because artists like Carla Dickens, who I'm a super huge fan of, came to see the show. And she walked out and she said to me, "Oh, Hannah, thank you for curating a show that didn't re-traumatize me. A show that I could walk in and enjoy and experience and feel connection to and have a laugh and know that it was still sophisticated contemporary artwork, and a balance of culture and language and connection and family and community, but still sophisticated as hell, both in materials and, you know, in the layering in the work. But that our mob could go into that space, that we could go into ACCA, this, you know, really important contemporary art space, and see ourselves reflected in there, and not just in through massacre or through, you know, terror and horror, and but through lightness. And there's actually a work that was one of the most popular in that show, which I didn't commission. I did commission all the other works, but the one that I didn't was Never Stop Writing. And that work really summed up these ideas that I was wanting to speak to. And I saw that work at Nikki's show at Tanandi for the first time. And it really started me thinking about how we talk about history in Indigenous art now. And for me, that work that came about, if you haven't seen it, please find it. It is definitely online. You'll find it on YouTube, Never Stop Writing. It was a video made by senior men, Alec Baker and Peter Munkery, and Mr. Pompey, who sadly has passed away now, but those guys got together, brought all the young men in to a camp and started talking about their history, who they are, what they like. And they all found connection with cowboys. They all found connection with that history of, you know, these old fellas, they were stockmen. They were senior cultural men, and they were working really hard. And normally when we see that history represented in contemporary art spaces, the focus is on the abuse, neglect, the stolen wages, you know, the slavery. But this work turns it on its head and reminds us, it gives those senior men an opportunity to talk about how they're proud of that history. They worked hard, they were bloody good at what they did. You know, that other side of this, that ownership that these senior men have of that time, and how that can be used. They made a spaghetti Western. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It is so funny and fabulous. And yet it's rooted in this history and this pride for that history that we just don't often hear about. And they're the stories that I'm interested in. They're the artists that I'm interested in, that are thinking about how to present things in a way that's true to them, not ignore that side of it, but maybe show a side of things that don't always get seen, if that makes sense. And this again shows with Never Stop Writing how important Tanandi is, how important Desert Mob is, how important these festivals are for us as curators, but also as artists, to be ambitious, to know that there's things in that year ahead, in, you know, to plan, you know, work towards. And how hard it's been that we haven't been able to all come together. Because I think throughout my career, it's opportunities to meet with artists, be on their country, you know, wherever that is, in their studio, out bush, wherever, and spend time with them, understand the context that their work is coming from, you know, so that I feel confident and comfortable in presenting that, and that I'm getting everything that I can out of that for them and for that process. And our art festivals are one of the most important times for me to meet with everyone, to say, how's it going? What have you seen? What's new? Who should I be looking at? You know, where did you get those earrings? All that important stuff. So yeah, I wish I was there, could be there to celebrate today with all of you. But yeah, these spaces, these festivals, these important exhibitions need to continue for all of us, because all of us as you know, young curators and artists look to these spaces. And I know they've been super important throughout my career as well. But yeah, I could keep rambling, but maybe you guys have got some questions or something like that. I hope that gave you some idea of some of the little projects that I've worked on that have continued over my career of however many years it's been in spaces.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That's so wonderful to get more of an insight into your practice and your approach, and your experience is so vast, and you've met so many curators and artists, and your approach the entire time, as you've demonstrated in every project you've talked about, has been so generous and so open and so about empowering the artists that you're working with. And I feel like that's a really kind of forgotten role of the curator in many ways. I think sometimes when people think about curators, they think about academia and catalogue writing and all of those kind of components, which are also very important. But really the role of the curator is as an advocate for the artists and for them to feel empowered and be able to present their work. So yeah, you've done that from the day that you started curating, which is really beautiful to see. And I think there's some really lovely synchronicities, not only between your approach and Nikki's approach, from what I see from Nikki's career as well, but also between the show you just mentioned at ACCA and the Tarnanthi Festival, and so many beautiful crossovers. And it's funny, as you started talking about Never Stop Writing, I instantly think about so many video works in Tarnanthi where I felt the same joy that I felt in your ACCA show, of just hilarious situations that have brought so much joy and so much love through that artwork. So it's really lovely to hear you talk more about that. But I wonder, Nikki, if I could ask you a question as well around the role of advocacy and the role of, which is, I guess we don't normally phrase it as advocacy, it's really just curating, but the way of supporting artists through exhibitions and the impact that that has. I'm sure that you've seen many artists come into the galleries, emerging artists, and leave really feeling really propped up and buoyed by the experience of being on show with their community in such a contemporary, sophisticated space as Tarnanthi.
Yeah, and I can really empathise with what you're saying, Hannah, in regards to, you know, it really is about relationships and, you know, those and for the long term, you know, it's about, you know, a lot of the artists that I've been working with now, like if I think about someone like Karen Mills, she first showed in Tarnanthi in 2015, and she's done a beautiful body of work for this year's Tarnanthi. So, and it's a whole suite of work, which, yeah, we're just thrilled, and we've given her an opportunity to have an artist moving image portrait done with Closer Productions. So that's going to be really wonderful, you know, to be able to see that once that's all edited. But that's something that, you know, I've really seen her become more confident. You know, it's been a really lovely journey to know her. You know, she's become a good friend, and just to see her gain confidence and, you know, feel comfortable doing something like an artist portrait, for me is I just am so thrilled for her. But that's what it's been like. You know, I just really treasure the opportunities that we have, and the chance to be able to provide a platform for the artists to be able to make work, to then show it. And I love those conversations where, you know, you can work with them to think about what is it that you're thinking of, you know, what's your work doing, what are you doing right now, how can we assist you to take it to another level, if you want to take it to another level. But, you know, that's really what Tarnanthi and this opportunity is about. It's, you know, it's about providing that next step. And, you know, when I was working here at the Art Gallery of South Australia prior to Tarnanthi, we didn't have support to do things. You know, every now and then there was a fund that we could apply for money through Arts SA, but they were really few and far between, those opportunities. So this has really made a remarkable difference to what we've been able to do, and I know that it's really helped to support the artists. So yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah. And the beauty of Tarnanthi is it's not just benefiting the South Australian ecosystem, but it's a national treasure. Everyone comes to South Australia when they can to be part of that community and to celebrate it. So it's important for all of us around the nation, which is a really beautiful thing. Yeah. Obviously, we're online right now when we'd planned to be doing this in person. So it's, you know, it's a reality that Darwin Art Fair was online. The Tarnanthi Art Fair will be online. Agency have been doing an incredible suite of artist talks online. Obviously those things don't replace being in person and being able to have a more kind of informal yarn about what we're up to and where we want to go, but it's a wonderful development that hopefully we can keep doing afterwards. I'm wondering, Hannah, if you can tell us a little bit about Agency and the online interactions that you guys have been presenting.
Yeah, so we've just done a series that has been a series called Untold. That's an ongoing series that Agency does, but we've just focused on the Telstra Art Awards, or the National Indigenous, Telstra Art Awards. So winners from that. So we've just had, I think, 4 weeks of talks with artists like Pedro Wanamiri and Hubert Paralucha and Mervyn Rabancha and lots of the winners from the awards. And it was just so lovely. They're not, the Untold series isn't like, it's just a nice chat and just to catch up and tell us about your work. And, you know, I know that we're like here in Melbourne, we're just hanging out to get somewhere and, you know, meet some of these like artists and get out on country. And, you know, we're so lucky that we can, even though we've got curfews and we've got lockdowns at the moment, we can still go out and go to the park and see some water and some trees. And I just got totally distracted because it's a crazy time. But yeah, that series has been really great just to feel, like you said, Debbie, like feel a bit connected to everyone and still be sharing and talking. And I think Agency, you know, we're young, we've only just kind of started, but we're doing lots of different projects that have been coming to us from the community. And that's what seems or feels really different. I'm so excited because we're not, you know, so many of the spaces, art spaces I've worked in are really, you know, coming up with some kind of structure, program, something, and then fitting the artists into that rather than the other way around. You know, we're being led by, you know, senior people in the arts and culture, you know, realm, and helping and assisting to, you know, do projects with them. Like I think we're working with you guys at Tanandi, Nikki, with the art fair. So like lots of different levels of programs and projects, and but relationships and community and really being there to nurture those projects and see them through is what we're all about. And check out our Instagram, actually, the Agency Instagram, because it is one of my favorite accounts on Instagram, because the crew, the team at Agency are just so onto it. There's they repost like artists and projects from everywhere, things that I'm constantly following accounts that they're showing. So even that in itself, I love their Instagram. But yeah, I think there's a future there for organizations like Agency that are more of an in-between, that I think is weighted towards the artists and the community rather than maybe where the money's coming from and that sort of thing.
So important.
It's Indigenous led. It's what I need in my life right now, I think.
Well, especially spoke earlier about being able to see yourself in an organization. So it sounds like, obviously something like Agency is really necessary, and it's really wonderful that you can join an organization where you do see yourself represented within it. It's beautiful to see. And also I guess they're collaborating in new ways because of the pandemic, that it obviously you can't go out to studio visits and see people, visit them on the land, but being able to do that online and still continue those relationships is really,
and having a great team. Like we've got on our board, we've got people from around the country as well, and we're always bringing in, like anytime we see, we've got an amazing CEO, Cade McDonald, who's worked with Mob for many years, up at Puku and in Pepe and in places where, he understands those relationships and he understands how important that is. And he knows that as a white fella, he's not there to dictate anything. And I think that so far has been hugely successful for the projects that we've done. He thinks about all these amazing things, and and I'm seeing them come to life and helping guide it. It's a good feeling. Yeah, I'm excited for the future of agency.
Same. I know at Guildhouse we've invited Kate into some of our programs, and he's been a wonderful asset in a conversation. So it's been lovely to be able to connect with agency.
Again, more people, more relationships, more, different ideas. You just, you grow with them all, like what you were saying. Yeah.
One thing I noticed throughout your presentation, Hannah, was a discussion of ongoing learning. I felt like every organisation you went to, you gathered more learning, and every artist you meet, you're learning more, which is really inspiring to think that you don't reach a point and you're like, I'm done. You're still gathering as much information as you can. That's what makes a good curator, I think. But I wonder if you have any particular inspirations that have guided you along the way. I mean, you've talked about that, and maybe Nikki can give us some indication too as to touch points along the way that have really made you think, oh, I did that. That was fantastic. I'm really onto my trajectory now. I'm in my groove. I can feel where I'm going. Were there any moments that were kind of light bulb for you?
I guess so I'm a Capricorn. Don't know if you're into star signs, but apparently I'm super ambitious. And I am not. I'm at war with that constantly. So I seem to find myself in these spaces that are like, wow, you worked really hard to get there. And I know I've worked really hard, to have the opportunities that I have. But at the same time, I'm like, if it's not working, or I'm not finding that I can work the way that feels right to me, I'll just move on. And I think that's why I've ended up in so many different spaces and different kinds of organizations. I think there were definitely pinch me moments where I went, oh my God, like I had the opportunity to work with Tracy Moffat for Venice for the Biennale. And like I was in Venice sitting next to Tracy Moffat, like, talking about installing the show. Like there's definitely been moments where I've just gone, this isn't real. Like I went to high school in Albury for a few years, and that it's Albury Regional Gallery that actually commissioned something more of Tracy Moffat's. So I, my senior year at high school, I was spending as much time as I could at that gallery, because Tracy's work was represented there, and it was really inspirational for me to see artists like Tracy and Destiny and artists that were using photography and new media and really pushing that boundary of what Aboriginal art was, at that time. And then to suddenly so many years later, actually be working with her. But at the same time, I feel like that often, Debbie. Like there's moments, where I've got to work on a project with an artist that no one's ever heard of, that isn't the big Tracy Moffat, and the discussions that take place, and that feeling of understanding what they're trying to say, and then helping them put that in a space or on a wall or whatever, like that can be just as exciting and fulfilling. So I'm not I'm kind of at conflict with that, like ambition and bigger, better spaces. It's but
I think ambition has different definitions though. You're not necessarily seeking ambition that is a spotlight, but you're seeking ambition for others as well. It's kind of a community ambition, which is incredible. We need more of you Capricorns.
Like every space I've been in, it's fighting for those artists to get good fees, or fighting for them to be able to use the space differently, or say something or do something, but that's fair. Thank you. That's actually really lovely, Debbie. Thank you.
And Nikki, what have been some of your highlights in the lead up to Tarnandy, whether it's this year or just in your career, that have made you think, oh, this is working? I've hit my stride.
I think it's a funny thing. Really early on, working here at the Art Gallery, Lisa Slade and we applied for some funding through Arts SA, and it was for an exhibition called Heartland. And we worked with, it was South Australian contemporary artists, so not only Aboriginal artists, but we approached Jala Arts and asked the ladies if they wanted to be involved in this idea that we had, and they said, sure, you have to come and visit. So we went up to Armata, and what we did was we sat in their studio at the Art Centre, and we thought about the space that we wanted to give them was in the heart of the exhibition space. And it was, when we worked it out, it was pretty well the size of their space, their studio.
Wow.
So that worked really well, because we could get them to visualize the gallery is this, the walls are higher than this, but essentially you've got all of this room. What do you want to do with it?
Wow. Heaven.
And what had happened was we had worked with the artists for the In Between Heaven and Hell. It was an exhibition at Tandanya that I was one of there were 5 co-curators. It was a big,
Wow,
crazy curatorial. And that was like something I was doing on the side while I was working here. And so the ladies had made those incredible bird sculptures on a Jupi Desert Weavers camp. And they were talking about the birds really needed the trees. So that was one of the next steps. So that was one of the projects that they did for Heartland. But what the other thing they did was that they started a series of paintings, and some of the men were involved as well. So it was just this, I think for me, it was that chance to really enable them to visualize the space. And their ideas, as soon as we stopped, we didn't talk for long. We just basically said, we've got this space, and we've got these incredible birds. Why don't you, is there anything else, kind of thing? And they didn't stop talking amongst themselves. And like there's lots and lots of talking, and everybody was very excited, and so were we, not really knowing what was going on, but knowing that things were stirring. And that the next thing that we received once we got home was this incredible photograph of Mary Pan, Ilawanti Ken, and Yurapaya Kaika Burton overlooking a model that Jonathan Jones had made for them, because they'd wrangled him in. They've got this space, in Adelaide, they've got this space and it's like this. So he did the actual model. So they sent us this photograph of them, 3 of those cheeky ladies peering over this thing, looking at us with these little figures of the birds and trees starting to form. Like it was just, and for me, that said it all. It was like, here we've given it over to them. We've empowered them to have ownership over this. It's not about us. We'll just fit it in. We'll work in with whatever you want to do. So that was incredible. And that room was brought to life by them coming down and doing Inma in that space. And honestly, the whole gallery got on board and really started to understand Aboriginal art and cultures. And it was a breakthrough for the gallery. And it was a breakthrough for us. It was something that really then the next step was it was later that year when I was asked to take on what became Tarnandi.
Yeah, wow.
That is incredible.
Far out.
Yeah.
And that it's incredible that, Nikki, you've managed to maintain that throughout the Tarnandi, program, that feeling. That's what we get. That's what I get.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I go see this show, it's it comes across. So yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's gorgeous.
No, that's wonderful. And that's like you say, it's artist led. It has to come from them. It has to be, we have to be guided by them, and we have to have big enough hearts and have our ears open and our eyes open to what everyone's saying to us, don't
Definitely.
we? Yeah. Without that, you miss too much. It's that thing of, Yeah, but and mind you, also what I've needed to be able to do that has been, the full support of Nick Mitzovich and Lisa Slade and now Rana Davenport, and the people that have worked really hard alongside me to enable us to keep moving and working this way, because not everybody's that lucky. Not everybody has a team that are with them and will allow that to happen. So yeah.
That's beautiful. That's so true, Nikki. It does take a community to not only put on a festival, most definitely, but an exhibition, and sometimes even, a studio visit or getting a catalogue together. It definitely is a community of people who are in the same spot, have the same amount of generosity and care, and are allowing the project to be artist-led. Beautifully put. Thank you both for your time today. It's been so incredible to hear about your career, Hannah, and your approach and your generosity and your lightness of spirit. It's been beautiful. And thank you so much, Nikki, for joining us and including us as part of Tarnity. It's such a pleasure to be part of this incredible festival, and to hear from you about your own personal experiences is just such a treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yeah, that was lovely.
Thank you.